Ella's soft footsteps echoed through the empty hallways of the corporate building, the only sounds accompanying her as she wiped down the glass windows with a cloth. The lights of the high-rise building flickered intermittently, casting shadows on the polished floors. Ella, a young woman in her mid-20s, was part of the cleaning staff, her job often overlooked by those working in the upper floors. But Ella didn't mind. She was content with the little things like the moments of silence, the escape from her demanding home life, and the rare chance to imagine a life she could only dream of. Her colleagues, the cleaning staff who worked alongside her, were friendly yet distant. They too carried the burden of long hours and low wages, yet Ella always remained the optimistic one. She tried to make small talk with the office workers when they passed by, but their curt nods and hurried footsteps reminded her that they never truly saw her. Later that night, Ella returned to her tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city. As she unlocked the door, the faint sound of a baby crying echoed from the small living room. Her younger sister, Lily, was sitting on the couch, her hands full with a newborn. The apartment was cramped and dimly lit, the furniture old and worn out. "Sorry, I'm late again," Ella said with a sigh as she placed her bag on the counter. Lily smiled weakly. "It's okay. I can handle it." Ella's mother, suffering from a chronic illness, lay in the next room, her breathing heavy and shallow. Ella's heart ached with the weight of her responsibilities. She had always wanted a chance to study, to escape the cycle of poverty. But for now, her family was her priority, and she had no choice but to keep working, hoping that one day things might change. The next evening, Ella arrived at the corporate building earlier than usual. As she was pushing her cleaning cart down the corridor, she was stopped by a man in a sharp suit. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite yet businesslike. "Can you help me? I'm looking for a file that was left in the conference room." Ella paused, recognizing the man. He was one of the senior executives who worked in the building, a man she'd never spoken to before. She hesitated before offering a small smile. "Of course. The conference room is just down the hall." As they walked together, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had seen him in passing, but they never interacted. He was part of the world she could only dream of: success, money, power. Ella tried to push away the feelings of inadequacy that stirred within her, reminding herself to stay professional. When they reached the conference room, he thanked her briefly before disappearing behind the heavy door, leaving her standing in the hallway. For a moment, she stood there, staring at the polished floor, wondering if she would ever be more than the woman who cleaned up after others. The days passed, and Ella continued to put in her long hours. Yet, the fleeting moments she shared with the executive, whose name she learned was Jason, lingered in her mind. He had been kind, respectful, different from most of the people she encountered. One evening, when the office workers were gone, she found herself finishing up in the break room, taking a short break. To her surprise, Jason appeared, looking slightly disheveled, a stack of papers in his hand. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his eyes scanning the empty room. "I've been thinking, you've been working here for quite some time now, haven't you?" Ella nodded, surprised by the question. "Yes, about 2 years." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "You've got a good work ethic. You seem different from the others." Ella's heart skipped a beat. "Thank you, sir. I try my best." Jason hesitated before adding, "You know, there's a lot of potential here, people who've started from where you are and made something of themselves." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment Ella dared to hope. Could someone like her ever break free from this life? Could she rise beyond her current situation, or was this all she would ever be? The next day, Ella had an important decision to make. Jason had invited her to an informal meeting about a potential internship in his department. It was a small chance, but it was a chance, nonetheless. Ella knew it wouldn't be easy. Her family, her life in the building, all the responsibilities she carried on her shoulders, but the idea of something more, of creating a different future, filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. With the weight of her decisions on her shoulders, Ella's story had only just begun, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might have the strength to chase after her dreams. Ella sat in her modest apartment that evening, staring at the flickering light from the small lamp on the nightstand. The invitation from Jason sat in her hand, a potential opportunity to leave the confines of the cleaning staff behind and step into a world of corporate meetings and opportunities. But as the moonlight streamed through her thin curtains, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her. Lily was asleep on the couch, the baby cradled in her arms. Their mother was in the next room, struggling to breathe, her coughs rattling the thin walls of the apartment. Ella's heart ached. How could she leave them? How could she chase a dream when her family needed her? The next morning, Ella's shift at the corporate building began, but her mind was miles away. She pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway with mechanical precision, her thoughts swirling around the decision she had to make. Jason had told her that the internship could lead to a full-time position, an opportunity that could change her life. But at what cost? As she polished the glass windows in the lobby, a sudden voice interrupted her thoughts. Ella. She turned to see Jason standing behind her, a briefcase in hand, his expression serious but kind. Hey, she said, her voice soft but warm. I didn't expect to see you here so early. Jason smiled faintly. I wanted to talk to you before you started your shift. You know, about the internship. I really think you should consider it. Ella hesitated, unsure how to respond. She looked into his eyes, sensing the sincerity in his words. But there was something else, something that made her feel exposed. Was she ready for a change? Could she really take this step without abandoning her family? I don't know, she began, struggling to find the right words. It's just that. I have responsibilities. My family needs me. Jason nodded, as if he understood. I get it, Ella. It's not easy to balance everything. But think about it, this could be your chance to change things. You've been working here for a long time, and you're clearly more than capable. You deserve better. Ella swallowed hard, the tears threatening to rise. I want better. I really do. But I can't just leave them. Jason gave her a reassuring smile. You don't have to choose between your family and your future. You can find a way to do both. But you have to take the first step, even if it's a small one. Ella stood there, her mind racing. She could see the genuine belief in Jason's eyes, the hope that this opportunity could be the key to unlocking her dreams. But was she strong enough to take that first step? As the day wore on, Ella found herself at a crossroads. She had spent her life working hard for little reward. Her family depended on her, and yet, she knew that if she didn't seize this opportunity, she would be stuck in this cycle forever. That evening, after finishing her shift, she sat on the steps of the building, staring out at the city lights below. The decision weighed heavily on her, but something inside her had shifted. She realized that the dreams she had pushed aside for so long were still there, quiet but alive. If she didn't chase them now, they might slip away forever. With a deep breath, Ella pulled out her phone and typed a simple message to Jason, I'm ready. Let's talk more about the internship. The words felt heavy, but they were a promise to herself to take that first step. Over the next few weeks, Ella worked tirelessly, learning more about the internship and preparing herself for the challenges that lay ahead. Jason continued to encourage her, offering advice and support as she navigated the unfamiliar world of corporate culture. She continued to balance her family responsibilities, taking care of her mother and helping Lily with the baby. But with each passing day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be sacrifices, moments of doubt, and times when she'd question her decision. But deep down, she knew that this was the only way to break free from the life she had always known. A few months into the internship, Ella had begun to prove herself. She was bright, dedicated, and had a natural talent for problem-solving skills that Jason had recognized early on. Her coworkers began to notice her too, and for the first time in her life, she felt seen. But the challenges of balancing her new role with her responsibilities at home were never far behind. Her mother's condition worsened, and the pressure of caring for her family weighed heavily on her. One evening, after a long day at the office, Jason offered her a chance to work on an important project, one that could significantly boost her career. But Ella hesitated. She had promised her family that she would be there for them, and the project would require her to spend even more time away from home. "I can't keep doing this," she confessed to Jason later that evening. "I'm torn between what I want and what they need." Jason sat beside her, his gaze steady. "I know. But what if you could build something better for them? What if this is your chance to give them more than what you can right now?" Ella took a deep breath, considering his words. The path ahead wasn't clear, but the opportunity was there, waiting for her to take it. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice soft. "But I'm ready to try." Ella took the plunge, accepting the project and working tirelessly to prove herself. The balance between her career and family responsibilities was difficult, but as time went on, she realized that she didn't have to choose between them. Her determination to succeed in both worlds was her strength. And with each new step, Ella realized that she was no longer the woman cleaning the hallways of a corporate building. She was someone with a future, someone who had the power to change her story. As Ella stood by the window of her modest apartment one night, watching the city lights twinkle below, she felt a sense of peace. She was still a daughter, a sister, and a caretaker. But she was also someone who dared to dream, and for the first time in a long while, she believed those dreams might just come true. The clock struck 5 in the evening, the air thick with tension in the high-rise office building of Jameson Enterprises. Inside the lavish CEO's office, Mr. Jameson sat behind his mahogany desk, scanning through the latest reports. His gaze, sharp as a blade, rarely wavered as he sifted through the data. But his mind was elsewhere on the upcoming event that he dreaded. The company's grand gala, an annual affair, was only a week away, and yet, Mr. Jameson had done everything in his power to avoid attending it. His reasons were twofold: his long-standing condition and his disdain for the superficiality of corporate events. Mr. Jameson, grumbling to himself, another blasted gala. Another night of pretending to be social. "I don't need these distractions. The company doesn't need them." As the CEO's mind lingered on the negative aspects, his executive staff filed into the office, all impeccably dressed and professional. Sophia, the head of marketing, took the lead, her tone diplomatic but firm. "Sophia, Mr. Jameson, we've finalized the guest list for the gala, and everything is on track. We need your confirmation to ensure the preparations can proceed smoothly." Mr. Jameson's fingers drummed against the polished wood of the desk, irritation flashing across his face. "Mr. Jameson," coldly, "you know I despise these events, Sophia. They're nothing but an excuse for people to flaunt their wealth and network in a meaningless way." Sophia, nodding, "I understand, but it's crucial for our brand image. The gala will reinforce our position in the market. Plus, it's a great opportunity for client retention." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of Mr. Jameson's words hanging in the air. His allergy to women, both metaphorically, in his inability to connect emotionally, and literally, a severe condition that made him physically react to close proximity with women, made these events even more of a nightmare. A genuine social connection was rare, and his physical discomfort around women only worsened the situation. Jules, the COO, and one of the few people who managed to challenge Mr. Jameson's rigid worldview, spoke up from across the room. "Jules, Jameson, you've got to understand that this event isn't just about the superficial stuff. It's about securing business deals, making connections, and keeping the company at the forefront of people's minds. You can't keep avoiding it." Mr. Jameson's icy glare turned toward Jules, his expression unmoving. "Mr. Jameson, I can, and I will. I've always handled business from behind the scenes. Why is it suddenly an issue?" Sophia, not one to back down, walked closer to Mr. Jameson's desk. "Sophia, we're talking about a significant portion of our revenue coming from partnerships forged at events like this. You're needed there, even if you don't want to be." Jules added, his tone less combative, but persuasive. "Jules, and we've made adjustments this year, Mr. Jameson. We've hired a specialized team to manage your condition. You won't have to deal with women up close. We can ensure your personal space is respected." The mention of his condition struck a nerve, and Mr. Jameson's features softened, just slightly. He had never asked for sympathy, but his allergy and extremely rare condition where proximity to women triggered painful, allergic reactions had always been a source of frustration for him. Mr. Jameson, reluctantly, "Fine. I'll attend. But only because this is more important than my personal discomfort. But there will be no handshakes, no conversations, just business." The staff exchanged looks of victory, knowing that they had won the battle, but they also knew that Mr. Jameson's compliance came with strings attached. He would be a presence, but not a participant. The days leading up to the gala were filled with meticulous planning. The staff ensured that every detail, from the venue layout to the guest list, adhered to Mr. Jameson's very specific demands. A team of assistants was assigned to make sure he was kept at a comfortable distance from any women, and his entrance would be timed to minimize interaction. The night of the gala arrived, and the grand ballroom was bathed in soft golden light. The air was thick with the buzz of the well-heeled crowd. Laughter, clinking glasses, and murmurs of high-stakes deals filled the space. Mr. Jameson entered the venue, tall and commanding, his presence instantly noticeable. He made his way through the room, flanked by his executive team, each one ensuring that his space was respected. Eyes followed him, as they always did, but he remained distant, detached from the festivities. As he stood off to the side, surveying the event, his discomfort was palpable. He was a king in his domain, both untouchable and isolated. Sophia, noticing his growing unease, approached cautiously, keeping a respectful distance. "Sophia, how are you holding up, Mr. Jameson?" Mr. Jameson, gruffly, "This is a waste of time." But despite his words, his gaze lingered on the crowd, watching as deals were struck and handshakes exchanged. It was clear that, for all his distaste, he understood the importance of the gala. As the evening continued, Mr. Jameson remained aloof, but in his own way, he was participating. His mind worked like a machine, evaluating, analyzing, and strategizing, even as he stood apart from the revelry. The gala, for all its pretense, had served its purpose. It kept the company moving forward, just as Mr. Jameson had known it would. The night wore on, and despite Mr. Jameson's stoic exterior, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere around him. The grand gala, brimming with social chatter and the clink of crystal glasses, seemed to lose some of its luster as the evening progressed. The CEO remained at his post, surveying the room with a sharp eye, his every move calculated, but it was clear he wasn't truly there, at least not in the way others were. Jules, ever the observer, watched Mr. Jameson from across the room, noting his detached demeanor. Jules had known him for years and could read the signs. Despite his tough exterior, Jameson wasn't impervious to the human need for connection. Jules made his way through the crowd and stood beside him, but not too close, knowing full well the delicate nature of their interaction. "Jules, you know, Jameson, you could be enjoying this a little more. Everyone's here to celebrate the company's success. It's not all about deals and profit." Mr. Jameson turned to him, his face unreadable, but there was a flicker in his eyes. "Mr. Jameson, celebration? In my world, success is earned through hard work, not applause. The real work happens behind closed doors, Jules. Not in this circus." Jules chuckled, unfazed by the cold tone. "Jules, I know you, Jameson. You might not be a fan of the spectacle, but you've got more than just the company to manage now. It's about reputation. Influence. People don't just remember who made the big deal, they remember who showed up and how they made people feel." Mr. Jameson's lips curled slightly, though not into a smile. It was more of a grimace. "Mr. Jameson, influence, huh? I've got enough of that without pretending to enjoy myself. But..." He paused, "Maybe I can indulge your perspective for a bit longer. I didn't go through all this trouble, just to sulk in the corner. Jules, that's the spirit. Now, there's a few people from our biggest partnership that you should meet. I'll take you to them." Mr. Jameson hesitated, his eyes scanning the crowd. There were a few familiar faces, colleagues, clients, competitors, but it all felt like a blur of fleeting connections. As Jules led him through the crowd, they encountered the first group of VIP guests. Mr. Jameson stood tall and composed, offering only polite nods and brief words. He exchanged pleasantries, but there was no warmth in his voice, no real interest in the conversations. Yet, his mere presence had an undeniable effect. His reputation preceded him, and people hung on every word, even if they couldn't decipher his true thoughts. The night was beginning to drag, and Mr. Jameson felt the familiar sense of exhaustion creeping in. But he had made a promise to himself, he would stay the course. At least for tonight. Meanwhile, in the background, Sophia and a few other members of the executive team were keeping a watchful eye on their CEO, ensuring that everything remained under control. They had orchestrated every detail to accommodate Mr. Jameson's condition, but as the evening went on, they began to sense an underlying shift. Something in the air was changing. Sophia made her way to a quieter part of the ballroom, where she saw Alana, one of the gala's coordinators, speaking with a guest. Sophia, approaching, "Is everything going smoothly?" Ella had always been the quiet type, content with her routine and never one for extravagant social events. The mysterious neighbor, Mrs. Alastair, had always intrigued her, an elegant woman with silver hair and a sharp, knowing gaze that made Ella wonder about her past. When Mrs. Alastair appeared at Ella's door, her usual calm demeanor was replaced with an urgent, yet strangely gentle insistence. "You must go, Ella," Mrs. Alastair said, her eyes gleaming. "This is your chance. The gala will be an experience like no other. Don't waste it." Ella hesitated, looking at the delicate gown draped over her neighbor's arm, a deep midnight blue, the fabric shimmering faintly under the soft lighting. It was beautiful, an extravagant contrast to her usual modest attire. "I don't know. I've never been to anything like this before," Ella admitted, feeling both thrilled and uncertain. "I'm not sure I belong there." Mrs. Alastair chuckled softly. "You belong wherever you wish to be, Ella. Trust me, you'll enjoy yourself. But remember, before midnight. Always before midnight." Ella couldn't shake off the mysterious warning, but something about Mrs. Alastair's demeanor made her feel it was important. With a deep breath, Ella agreed, knowing she could always make her exit if she felt uncomfortable. The night of the gala arrived, and as Ella entered the event, she felt a wave of unfamiliar sensations. The grandeur of the venue, the soft sounds of an orchestra playing in the background, and the elegant guests mingling around her, it was a world unlike anything she'd ever known. Despite her initial discomfort, Ella found herself growing more confident as the night wore on. She even caught the eye of a charming young man, who introduced himself as Marcus. He had a warmth to him, and as they danced under the shimmering lights, Ella felt a spark of something she hadn't expected: adventure, excitement, and maybe even the beginnings of a connection. But as the clock drew closer to midnight, Ella couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. The air seemed to thicken, and the once lively atmosphere began to shift, growing more intense. It was then that she noticed Mrs. Alastair, standing by a distant corner of the ballroom, her eyes fixed intently on Ella. A sense of urgency stirred within her. Ella glanced at the clock. Only minutes remained. Her heart raced, and she excused herself from Marcus, promising to return. But as she made her way toward the exit, she found herself blocked by a figure, a tall, cloaked man, whose face remained hidden. "Not yet, Ella," the man's voice was low, almost a whisper. "There are things you still don't understand." Ella's breath caught in her throat as a chill ran through her. Just as she was about to turn and flee, Mrs. Alastair appeared at her side, her eyes narrowing in a way that sent a shiver down Ella's spine. "Leave her," Mrs. Alastair commanded, her voice as sharp as a blade. "She is not yet ready to face the truth." The man stepped back, and the room seemed to breathe again. Ella, still trembling, turned to Mrs. Alastair. "What is going on? What is this place?" Mrs. Alastair's gaze softened, but only slightly. "You've been given a glimpse, Ella. But some things cannot be understood all at once. There are forces at play tonight, forces you're not yet ready to fully comprehend. But your journey is just beginning. Now go. Before midnight." Ella didn't need to be told twice. She turned and hurried out of the ballroom, the weight of the night pressing heavily on her chest. As the clock struck midnight, she crossed the threshold of the gala, feeling both relieved and inexplicably changed. What had she truly walked into? And why had Mrs. Alastair gone to such lengths to ensure she attended? The answers, Ella knew, would come in time. But for now, she had to return to her quiet life, and wait for the next invitation. Ella arrived back at her small, cozy home just as the final chimes of midnight echoed through the streets. Her heart still raced, her mind swirling with questions and the strange, unshakable feeling that she had crossed a threshold into a world she didn't fully understand. She couldn't explain what had happened, but something in the air tonight had shifted within her. As she stepped through the front door, she found Mrs. Alastair waiting in the hallway, her presence calm yet expectant. The older woman's silver hair gleamed faintly in the dim light, and her dark eyes seemed to pierce through Ella, as if reading her every thought. "Did you enjoy yourself?" Mrs. Alastair asked, her voice warm but laced with an edge of mystery. Ella hesitated, unsure of how to describe the whirlwind of emotions and sensations that had taken place. It was unlike anything I've ever experienced. But there was something off about it. And the man, the one who stopped me when I tried to leave. Who was he? Mrs. Alastair's face remained unreadable, but her eyes flickered with something like regret. "You were warned, Ella. You didn't fully understand what tonight was, did you?" Ella shook her head. "No, I don't. What is this all about? Why did you make me go? And who was that man?" The older woman sighed softly, her expression softening for a moment. "The gala. It's not just a celebration, Ella. It's a gathering of those who know what lies beyond the surface of the world you've always known. The man you saw, he's part of a group that protects what you are not meant to see. And you, my dear, have been chosen." Ella's confusion deepened. "Chosen for what?" Mrs. Alastair stepped closer, her voice growing more urgent. "For a purpose. Something ancient, something that has been in motion long before you or I came into this world. That man, and others like him, are guardians of secrets. But you, Ella, are not just anyone. You've been marked for something much greater than yourself." Ella's mind reeled. She could feel her pulse quicken as the weight of the words settled on her. She had always known there was something more to life than the small, predictable world she'd lived in. But this? It was too much to grasp all at once. What do I do now?" Ella whispered, her voice trembling. Mrs. Alastair placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Now, you wait. You will be tested. There are forces at play that will challenge you in ways you can't yet imagine. But you will be ready. And when the time comes, you'll understand." Ella could only nod, a mix of dread and curiosity filling her chest. She didn't fully understand, but she knew she had crossed into a new reality, a world of secrets, forces beyond her control, and a destiny she was only beginning to grasp. The following days passed in a blur. Ella tried to return to her normal life, but everything felt different. Her interactions with her friends seemed shallow. The world felt quieter, as though it was holding its breath. And she kept seeing glimpses of things she couldn't explain, a flicker of movement in the corner of her vision, strange symbols hidden in the architecture of her town, and an eerie feeling that she was being watched. Then, one evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, there was a knock at her door. Ella opened it to find Marcus standing there, his expression serious. His presence stirred something in her, an instinct she couldn't place. "I've been looking for you," he said softly, his gaze intense. "It's time." "Time for what?" Ella asked, her heart skipping a beat. "For you to understand the full truth. Mrs. Alastair told me you'd be ready. Come with me." Without waiting for a response, Marcus turned and began to walk down the street, his stride purposeful. Ella stood frozen for a moment, but something in her told her this was the moment she couldn't ignore. She followed him, the world around her seeming to close in as they walked toward the outskirts of town. They reached a secluded garden, a place Ella had never seen before. It was bathed in the soft glow of lanterns, and at its center stood a stone pedestal, covered in intricate carvings. Marcus turned to her. "This is where it begins, Ella. You must step forward and claim your place. You were chosen for a reason. And now, you must accept what comes next." Ella's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what awaited her, but she knew one thing for certain: she could no longer turn back. The world she had known was gone, replaced by a deeper, darker reality that was slowly revealing itself to her. With a deep breath, Ella stepped forward. And in that moment, everything changed. The ground beneath her feet seemed to hum with energy. Light flickered from the pedestal, and the carvings on its surface seemed to shift and come alive. As the symbols began to glow, Ella felt something stir within her, something powerful, something ancient. And just like that, she understood. She had been chosen to step into a role far greater than herself, a protector of hidden truths, a keeper of the balance between worlds. But with that understanding came a heavy burden. As the light engulfed her, she knew that she was no longer the quiet, uncertain Ella. She was something more. And from that moment forward, her life would never be the same. Ella arrived at the gala in a breathtaking gown, its deep emerald hue accentuating her glowing skin and graceful movements. Her hair, styled in soft waves, framed her face perfectly, and her eyes, glowing with an unmistakable spark of confidence, seemed to captivate everyone in the room. She walked through the crowd with an air of elegance that made her completely unrecognizable to her colleagues, who were used to seeing her in more professional attire. Whispers of admiration filled the air as she passed, but she paid them no mind, her focus solely on the night ahead. Among the guests was Mr. Jameson, the well-known philanthropist and art collector, a man with a reputation for his sharp eye for beauty and his refined tastes. As he caught sight of Ella across the room, he was momentarily stunned. He had met her on several occasions in the past, but tonight, something was different. She seemed to radiate an aura of sophistication and allure that he couldn't resist. As if drawn by an invisible force, he made his way toward her. "Miss Ella," he greeted with a warm smile, his voice smooth but with a hint of surprise. "I must admit, I hardly recognized you. You're a vision tonight." Ella returned his smile, her eyes twinkling with a mixture of charm and mystery. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson. I thought tonight would be a good opportunity to step out of my usual shell." Their conversation flowed easily, and soon, they found themselves talking not just about the gala, but about their mutual love for the arts. Mr. Jameson, ever the patron, spoke passionately about his latest art acquisitions, while Ella shared her own admiration for both the creative process and the profound impact art could have on society. They both agreed that art held the power to inspire change, a sentiment that resonated deeply with them both. As the night progressed, the music swelled, and the guests were invited to the dance floor. Mr. Jameson, ever the gentleman, extended his hand to Ella, asking her for a dance. With a graceful nod, she accepted, and the two of them moved onto the floor, gliding together in a perfect rhythm. Their chemistry was undeniable, their movements synchronized as if they had danced together for years. As they twirled beneath the sparkling chandelier, the outside world seemed to vanish, leaving just the two of them in a world of their own. The conversation continued between dances, and they discovered even more shared interests. Both were passionate about philanthropy, each having devoted a significant portion of their time to causes they cared about deeply. Ella spoke about her desire to create art programs for underprivileged youth, while Mr. Jameson talked about his efforts to support environmental initiatives. "Art is a reflection of life," he replied, his eyes gleaming with an earnestness that made her admire him even more. "It's about capturing moments, emotions, stories. I've always believed that the right piece can speak to the soul." Their conversation flowed seamlessly, touching on everything from the meanings behind the works on display, to their shared belief in the power of art to provoke change. They stood before a painting of a group of children playing, their joy so palpable that their connection deepened with every word, and Ella couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration as the night wore on. She had always been passionate about helping others, but to find someone who not only shared her views but was also so actively involved in similar causes was something rare and precious. As the night drew to a close, they found themselves standing together on the balcony, the cool night air a perfect contrast to the warmth of the evening. The city lights twinkled below them, and the sounds of laughter and music floated in the distance. "I never expected this evening to turn out the way it has," Ella said softly, gazing out over the city. Mr. Jameson smiled, his eyes never leaving her. "Neither did I. But sometimes, life has a way of bringing people together when they least expect it." Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to stand still. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a connection that had blossomed over the course of the evening. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for that moment, they both knew that their paths had crossed for a reason. As the gala came to an end and the guests began to leave, Mr. Jameson walked Ella to her car, his hand lightly resting at the small of her back. "I hope this isn't the last time we meet," he said, his voice sincere. Ella smiled, feeling a flutter in her chest. "I hope not, either." With a final, lingering look, she stepped into the car, and as it drove off into the night, she couldn't help but feel that her life had just taken a turn in a new and exciting direction. The following days were filled with a sense of anticipation and wonder for Ella. After the gala, she couldn't shake the memory of her conversations with Mr. Jameson. His presence lingered in her thoughts, and she found herself replaying their shared moments, his intelligent gaze, the ease of their connection, and the way he spoke with such genuine passion about art and philanthropy. There was something about him that intrigued her, something beyond the surface. He wasn't just another wealthy patron, he had depth, a quiet strength that made her want to know more. As the week passed, Ella received a letter from Mr. Jameson, a formal invitation to attend an exclusive art exhibition he was hosting at his private gallery. The invitation was elegantly worded, with a personal note from him at the bottom that read, "I would be honored if you would join me at the exhibition. It would be a pleasure to continue our conversation and share the art that I have recently acquired. I look forward to seeing you again." Ella couldn't help but smile at the thought of seeing him again. She had been to many art exhibitions before, but this one felt different. This one felt like it was more than just about the art. It was an opportunity to further explore the connection they had begun to build. On the evening of the exhibition, Ella arrived, wearing a tailored dress that highlighted her elegance while still remaining true to her personality. As she entered the gallery, the soft lighting and the carefully curated pieces of art instantly captivated her. But it was Mr. Jameson who immediately caught her eye, standing near a painting that depicted a serene landscape, his back turned to the room, lost in thought. When he turned and saw her approaching, his face broke into a warm, welcoming smile. "Miss Ella," he greeted, his voice as soothing as it had been at the gala. "You look as radiant as ever." Ella smiled, feeling a wave of warmth wash over her. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson. This exhibition is stunning. You've clearly put a lot of thought into it. Seemed to leap off the canvas." "I can see why you were drawn to this one," Ella remarked, her voice soft. "The innocence of childhood, the simplicity of happiness, it's something we could all use more of in the world." Mr. Jameson nodded, his gaze lingering on the painting. "I agree. It's one of my favorites. There's something pure in the way children see the world, unburdened by the complexities we face as adults. It reminds me of why I invest so much into causes that support education and youth empowerment." Ella felt a surge of admiration for him, realizing that his commitment to philanthropy wasn't just a means to an end, it was a deep part of who he was, something that shaped his every action. As the evening unfolded, they continued to share their perspectives, their laughter mingling with the hushed voices of other guests. But there was a certain intimacy in their connection, an unspoken understanding that made them seem like two people who had known each other far longer than just a few short days. Every glance, every word exchanged, seemed to build upon the last, weaving a tapestry of shared dreams and values. The soft glow of the city lights below bathed the gala balcony in a cool, ethereal light, the gentle hum of music from the ballroom just barely audible. Ella stood near the edge, her gaze drifting toward the horizon, lost in the dreams that had always seemed just out of reach. She had always longed for more than the life she had, more than the ballroom and the charmed existence her family seemed to relish. I want to make something of myself, Ella whispered, her voice vulnerable, yet determined. I want to paint the world with my own hands, not just follow the path others have set out for me. I dream of seeing the places others only talk about, feeling the freedom of living on my own terms. Mr. Jameson, standing nearby, took in the sincerity in her words. His gaze softened, though it was clear his mind was elsewhere. After a moment, he finally spoke, his voice tinged with a mixture of melancholy and caution. You remind me of someone, he said, his eyes distant, as though he were reliving a memory. Someone I once knew, who had dreams that could have lit the world on fire. But those dreams faded, because she never learned to trust anyone. Ella turned toward him, surprised by the quiet sorrow in his tone. What do you mean? She asked softly. He took a deep breath, as if the words were difficult to form. Trust, it's something I've always struggled with. I've been burned too many times, and now, it's like an allergy. It makes me sick to rely on anyone, to let anyone in. Ella's eyes softened, her heart aching for him. But how do you ever find peace if you shut people out? He glanced at her, his expression guarded yet vulnerable. I don't know, Ella. Maybe I don't even want to anymore. I don't know how to let go of the fear that keeps me safe. There was a long silence between them, broken only by the distant sound of laughter and music. Ella's heart raced, an overwhelming desire to help him stirring within her, but she could sense the walls he had built around himself high and impenetrable. Before she could respond, the clock in the ballroom struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the night air like a warning. Ella's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. She had no time left. Without thinking, she reached into her wrist, removing a delicate bracelet, a simple silver chain with a single charm, shaped like a crescent moon. It was a token, one she had carried with her for years, a reminder of who she was before the world had tried to shape her into something she wasn't. With trembling hands, she placed the bracelet on the stone railing, her fingers brushing against the cool metal. It was a symbol of her own dream, her desire to live beyond the confines of her gilded cage. I have to go, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mr. Jameson stepped forward, his hand outstretched, but Ella was already slipping away into the shadows, the sound of her heels clicking softly against the stone as she disappeared into the night. The moment she was gone, Mr. Jameson's gaze fell to the bracelet, his fingers brushing it gently. There was something about her, something raw and untamed, that pulled at him in ways he couldn't explain. He could feel the weight of her unspoken words hanging in the air, but it was too late. The walls he had built were too strong, and he had pushed her away without even realizing it. And yet, as he held the bracelet, he couldn't help but feel that, somehow, Ella's dreams and fears had intertwined with his own. Something had shifted, a momentary crack in the armor he had so carefully constructed around his heart. Ella's departure left an emptiness in the air, but also the faintest glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to trust again. In the days that followed, both Ella and Mr. Jameson found themselves haunted by their brief conversation. Ella had vanished into the night, but the moon-shaped bracelet lingered in his thoughts. He began to wonder, was it a sign? Or simply a reminder of a fleeting connection that would slip away like sand through his fingers? Ella, meanwhile, struggled to hold on to the dreams she had shared, but the world seemed to close in on her. She couldn't forget the look in Mr. Jameson's eyes as he spoke of his allergy to trust, but she couldn't help but feel a pull toward him, a longing to help him heal the wounds he kept hidden. And so, a journey began. A journey of two souls, broken in their own ways, whose paths had crossed in the most unlikely of places. Would they find a way to trust each other, or would the forces that kept them apart prove too strong to overcome? The answer, like the moon in the night sky, was yet to be written. The day after the gala, Ella found herself back at the corporate building, donning her cleaning uniform once again. The stark contrast between the glamour of the gala and the mundane duties she was now performing made her feel as though she were caught between two worlds, one where she was invisible and the other where she had shone brightly in Mr. Jameson's gaze. As she pushed her cart down the sleek, polished hallways, Ella couldn't help but think of the mysterious man who had taken her hand so effortlessly on the dance floor. The bracelet she wore now felt like an anchor, tying her to that magical night, but it also weighed heavily on her, reminding her of how quickly it had all ended. Meanwhile, in his office, Mr. Jameson sat behind his desk, staring at the delicate bracelet he had found at the gala. It glistened in the morning light, and he couldn't shake the image of the woman who had worn it. His mind raced as he recalled her mysterious smile, the way she had vanished into the crowd, and the spark of connection between them. Unable to let the matter rest, Mr. Jameson ordered his team to discreetly search for any trace of the woman. They combed through security footage, questioning staff, and even checking guest lists from the gala, but no one seemed to have any information. He couldn't fathom how someone like her had just disappeared into the night. There had to be an explanation, a connection, and he was determined to find it. Back at the building, Ella continued her work, trying to push away the memories of the night. She had returned to her regular routine, scrubbing floors, emptying trash cans, and making sure every corner gleamed. Yet, each time her hand brushed against the bracelet, she was reminded of the way Mr. Jameson had looked at her with such intensity, a gaze that still lingered in her thoughts. At lunch, one of her colleagues, Jenna, sat down next to her with a playful smile. "So, how was the gala last night? Heard you were rubbing elbows with the city's elite." Ella's face flushed, and she quickly turned her attention to her meal. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ella muttered, trying to dismiss the memory of the extravagant event. Jenna raised an eyebrow. "Come on, I saw you leave with that tall, handsome guy. You didn't get his number, did you?" Ella's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't exactly tell Jenna the truth. It was too complicated, too surreal. She had danced with Mr. Jameson, shared a fleeting moment of connection, but then reality had pulled her back. "Nothing happened," Ella said, forcing a smile. "It was just a night like any other." But deep inside, she knew it wasn't. She knew that something had shifted, something had changed. Meanwhile, Mr. Jameson was relentless. His search had turned up nothing of interest, and frustration began to gnaw at him. He had begun to suspect that Ella, the woman from the gala, worked within the building. After all, she had vanished the same night, and she fit the description of the mysterious woman he had danced with. But how could she be here, working as part of the building staff? Mr. Jameson couldn't shake the idea of her. There was something about her, something so familiar yet elusive, that kept him coming back for more answers. And so, as Ella continued her work, unknowingly caught in the web of his search, both their worlds were about to collide once more. The question now was not if they would meet again, but when. Ella moved through the polished office with practiced ease, her cleaning supplies in hand, wiping down the large mahogany desk. It was late, and most of the office staff had gone home. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound that filled the otherwise quiet room. She had been cleaning Mr. Jameson's office for several months now, but tonight was different. Tonight, she felt a sense of unease as the door opened behind her. "Ella," a deep voice called from the doorway. She stiffened, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned around to find Mr. Jameson standing there, his imposing figure framed by the doorframe. His suit was sharp, his eyes keenly observing her, but there was something in his gaze that wasn't the usual detachment. There was recognition, something she couldn't place. "Mr. Jameson," she said, her voice polite, but her hand slightly trembling. She was caught off guard, unsure of what to say. This wasn't the first time they had crossed paths in the building, but it was the first time he had addressed her like this. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, taking a step into the office, his gaze fixed on her. "I didn't realize you worked here as a cleaner." Ella met his eyes, her own defensively sharp. She had never been one to let anyone treat her as invisible, even in the corporate world where people like Mr. Jameson dominated the landscape. "I don't expect many people to notice me, Mr. Jameson," she replied coolly. He raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Maybe I didn't notice before, because you were always in the background." His eyes softened for a moment, and he took another step toward her. "But now, I can't seem to get you out of my mind." Ella's breath caught in her throat. The quiet intensity in his voice made her heart race. She quickly regained her composure and set her cleaning supplies down on the desk. "What are you getting at, Mr. Jameson?" He leaned against the desk, his arms crossed, studying her. "You and I both know there's something more between us than just a cleaner and her boss. I've seen the way you look at me when you think no one's watching, and I'd be lying if I said I hadn't felt it too." Ella's mind raced, her emotions in turmoil. She had always been careful to keep her distance, knowing the risks of any sort of connection with him. He was her superior, and a relationship like that could ruin her career, her reputation, everything she had worked so hard for. "I'm not like the others," she said firmly, keeping her voice steady. "I'm not interested in playing games, Mr. Jameson. I know how these things can go." He chuckled softly. "I'm not asking for anything to be rushed. But I can't deny that I'm intrigued by you, Ella. There's something real here, something beyond the office." Ella's eyes narrowed slightly, and she took a step back. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice low, almost challenging. "I want to," he replied, his tone quiet but insistent. "I don't want this to be a fleeting attraction, Ella. But I understand the risks. I can't force you to make any decisions now." She hesitated, torn between the undeniable pull she felt toward him and the voice of reason that screamed at her to keep her distance. "You don't get it, Mr. Jameson. There are consequences. People will talk. And when they do, we'll both lose." He looked at her, the intensity of his gaze softening, a small hint of regret in his expression. "I know. I'm not blind to the dangers. But sometimes, the risks are worth taking." Ella's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly shook off the feeling. "Not in this case," she said firmly. "We can't afford it." There was a long pause between them, the air thick with unspoken emotions. Mr. Jameson finally nodded, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I won't push. But know this, Ella, whatever happens, I'll respect your decision." She glanced at him one last time, before turning to pick up her cleaning supplies. "You should," she said quietly. As she walked toward the door, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She had always been cautious about the lines she drew between herself and the people she worked with. But Mr. Jameson, there was something about him that made it impossible to ignore. Ella left the office, the door clicking shut behind her, but the conversation lingered in her mind, the echo of Mr. Jameson's words reverberating in her thoughts. The risks were real, but so was the pull between them. And for the first time, Ella wasn't sure if she could simply walk away. The sun had begun to set, casting a golden hue over the city as Ella stood at the edge of the rooftop, gazing at the skyline. Her heart was pounding as she faced the decision of her life. Mr. Jameson, the stern yet caring CEO of the company, had just confessed his feelings for her, and with that confession came an offer to join him, not only in his personal life but also as a partner in the company, a role she had never even dreamed of. But Ella's life had always been simple. She had worked hard for everything she had and wasn't used to the world of luxury and high-status relationships. She had grown up in modest circumstances and was content with her simple life, where every decision was hers and hers alone. The thought of entering Mr. Jameson's world of high expectations and corporate power made her hesitate. She wasn't sure if she was ready to change everything for the chance of love, let alone balance love and business. Mr. Jameson, seeing her hesitation, took a deep breath and stepped closer. Mr. Jameson's vulnerability. "I know this isn't easy, Ella," he said quietly, his voice betraying the vulnerability he rarely allowed others to see. "I've spent my whole life building this empire. But none of it means anything without someone to share it with. You've shown me something I never thought I needed, kindness, a perspective on life that's real and grounded. You're the only person who's ever truly seen me for who I am, not just as Mr. Jameson, the CEO." Ella looked at him, torn between the stability of her current life and the unpredictable allure of the future he was offering. "But this, everything you're offering me, it's so much. What if I fail?" She wasn't sure if she could live up to the expectations of the corporate world, much less those of a relationship with a man like Mr. Jameson, who was accustomed to success and order. Would she lose herself in the process? I'm not asking you to be anyone else, Ella, Mr. Jameson continued, his eyes softening. I'm asking you to be you, because that's the person I value. And together, we could build something even greater than either of us could do alone. Ella's thoughts swirled, her heart at war with her mind. She knew the risks, the sacrifices. But she also saw the depth of his sincerity, and felt the spark of something real. The chance at love, true love, was a rare thing, and it might be the one thing that could make all the risks worth it. After a long pause, Ella finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly but resolute. I've spent my life being cautious, hiding from what could hurt me. But maybe it's time to take a leap. She turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his with newfound strength. I'll take the chance. For us. For the love we could have. And if it doesn't work out, we'll figure it out together. The moment hung between them, heavy with possibility. Mr. Jameson reached out, his hand warm and steady, and Ella took it without hesitation. I'll make sure you never regret this, he promised, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. Not just in business, but in life. We're partners, in every sense. And as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, they shared a quiet moment of understanding. The world had shifted beneath them, but they stood together, ready to face whatever came next. The room fell silent as Mr. Jameson, standing at the podium, cleared his throat. His usual confident demeanor was softened by a quiet pride. He glanced over at Ella, who stood to the side, looking every bit the part of someone who had earned her place in this world, even though she had only recently taken the leap. It's been an incredible year for all of us, but tonight, I'd like to highlight someone who has truly embodied the spirit of this company. Ella, Mr. Jameson began, his voice rich with warmth. Ella, who had kept her gaze downward in modesty, lifted her head, her heart racing. She hadn't expected such a public acknowledgement. She had grown accustomed to being in the background, working diligently behind the scenes. But now, as she stood before her colleagues, she could feel her life shifting in front of her very eyes. Ella has shown not just the intellect and work ethic needed to succeed in our industry, but also the heart that this company was built upon. I'm proud to announce that she will be stepping into the role of Chief Operating Officer. A role I know she will bring her unique perspective and wisdom to. There was a stunned silence for a moment, before the applause erupted. Ella felt the weight of her transformation wash over her as the applause echoed in her ears. She had been the girl who once thought she would never have a place in this world. Now, she stood at the top, a symbol of perseverance, of overcoming her past. She turned to Mr. Jameson, her eyes filled with gratitude, and saw him smiling at her with pride and something deeper, something more intimate. Later, after the event had settled down and the guests began to mingle, Mr. Jameson approached her, his eyes softening as he met her gaze. You did it, Ella. You've earned every bit of this, he said, his voice quiet, but thick with emotion. Ella smiled, a tender, almost shy smile, the weight of the moment grounding her. She took a step closer to him. I couldn't have done it without you. You believed in me when no one else did. Not even I believed in myself. As the event wound down and the last few colleagues lingered by the bar, Ella and Mr. Jameson stepped onto the balcony, away from the crowd, to have a moment of peace amidst the chaos. Looking out over the city, Ella let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The night was beautiful, the skyline shimmering under the lights, just like the possibilities ahead of her. Mr. Jameson stepped beside her, his hand brushing against hers in a quiet, intimate gesture. This is only the beginning, he said softly, his voice carrying the promise of something more. I know it won't always be easy, but I want to navigate this future with you. Together. Both in work and in life. Ella looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of love and hope. The city seemed to pulse with energy around them, as though it too were holding its breath, waiting for their next move. I want that too, she said, her voice steady, though filled with a vulnerability she hadn't known she possessed. I want to build something with you. A life, a future that we can be proud of. A future where we support each other through everything. Mr. Jameson smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in that way that made Ella's heart flutter. He took her hand, gently squeezing it, and whispered, "Then let's build it. Let's face everything that comes, together." They stood there for a moment longer, the night sky enveloping them in its quiet serenity. The world, once a daunting place for Ella, now felt full of endless possibilities, just as her relationship with Mr. Jameson had become. As the event ended, Ella knew that her life would never be the same. She had not only stepped into a new role at the company, but she had also stepped into a future filled with love, support, and the promise of partnership. In each other, they had found not just success, but a shared commitment to facing whatever came next, hand in hand.